There's something different about you now. You can feel it, right? Well, your presence here isn't a coincidence. It's confirmation of your inner transformation that most people will never understand. And honestly, they don't want to. Have you noticed how life feels different? Like you're on a completely different frequency from everyone else. That's because you are. What I'm about to share with you is the truth about what happens when you actually cross the threshold that 99% of people spend their entire lives avoiding. This will either validate what you've been experiencing or completely dissolve your ideas about what being awakened actually looks like. Hey friend, I'm Christy, a board certified nurse practitioner, health coach, and trauma survivor. Welcome to Trauma Free, where I help you change your mind and change your life, just like I did. So let's get into it. Here's what's really happening to you. You've crossed a threshold that most people won't ever get to. This occurs when life stops happening to you and starts happening for you. Research on neuroplasticity has found that having a new profound awareness rewires your brain's default mode network, the neural pathway responsible for self-referential processing, which is the constant mental noise that you hear in your head about me, myself, and I. But when you cross this threshold, brain scans show decreased activity in the medial prefrontal cortex, the region associated with your ego and self-judgment. First, you may have noticed that your old triggers don't bother you anymore. Not because you're so elevated, but because you stop feeding them the narrative that they need to survive. When we stop telling ourselves made-up stories about how we feel, the emotions themselves lose their grip on us. Second, you become energetically sensitive, where you can sense the emotional tone of people before they even speak, which is called emotional contagion. So now, you can be consciously aware of it rather than being unconsciously influenced by it. And third, you have a temporal shift where time feels different. Minutes can feel like hours when you're present, and hours can pass like minutes when you're in flow, because our experience of time is directly related to our level of self-awareness. Let me ask you this. When was the last time something that used to completely throw you off barely even got a response out of you? When did you start seeing other people's reactions as information about them rather than about you? You've truly become a different person that operates from a different neurological baseline than you did once before. The journey to becoming your authentic self isn't about adding more to who you are. It's about releasing everything you're not. And this process, it can be tough. And the majority of adults never even progress beyond a socialized mind, where their sense of their self is entirely dependent on external validation and social roles. Think about this for a moment. How much of who you think you are is actually just a collection of other people's expectations, cultural programming, and survival strategies that you developed over time? Sadly, only 35% of adults ever develop a self-transforming mind, which is the capacity to step outside yourself and examine it objectively, which is necessary in order to live authentically. With every layer of conditioning you shed, it will cost you something, and the price is always higher than what you expect. So that relationship built on your people pleasing, it dies when you stop performing. That career that required you to be someone you're not, it becomes unbearable. And that version of yourself that others found comfortable, it becomes impossible to maintain. Because being authentic and belonging, they don't go together. In a world that profits from your disconnection from yourself through consumerism, social media algorithms, and systems that require your compliance, choosing to be your real self is an act of rebellion. The fashion industry, they need you to feel inadequate about your appearance. Social media needs you to constantly compare yourself to others. Political systems need you to identify with groups rather than thinking for yourself. And your authenticity threatens every system that relies on your unconsciousness. Most people choose a familiar prison over unknown freedom because being free comes with a terrifying requirement. You have to take total responsibility for your life. No more blaming your parents for your relationship patterns or using your trauma as an excuse for not changing. And no more hiding behind your circumstances, society, or generational curses. This is why most people never attempt to be their real self, because they can't handle the internal responsibility that comes with it. Now, this can be confusing. The final test isn't about achieving some spiritual milestone or proving your worthiness. It's about surrendering to the idea that everything should be a certain way. The brain's effortless awareness networks that are active during flow states and deep meditation are actually suppressed when we're trying to control our outcomes. When we have an achievement-oriented mindset, we create a self-improvement prison where we become addicted to the feeling of progress, of getting better, or of becoming even more evolved. Can you be okay with being ordinary? Can you find the extraordinary in your regular routine? Can you sit with the possibility that there's nothing to improve or nowhere to go? Because the very act of seeking creates the illusion of separation from what you're looking for. And the moment you stop seeking proof that you've awakened is the moment that everything changes. That's when you recognize that seeking was the only thing keeping you from what you were searching for. True control is about being so centered in your authentic self that external circumstances become irrelevant to your inner state. When you stop trying to control outcomes and start responding consciously to whatever arises, you discover that life begins to work with you instead of against you. Unfortunately, nobody warns you about the loneliness you'll endure because you become too aware for your old relationships, and finding new ones that match your frequency can be difficult while you exist in a liminal space alone. Most people unconsciously choose relationships that reinforce their current level of consciousness, like your college friends who still complain about the same problems they had 10 years ago, or your family members who react to growth with criticism. Or what about your coworkers who bond over gossip and complaining? When you shift dramatically, you become incompatible with your previous circles of people that you used to be with. You'll find yourself trapped by one of three problems. Number one, your old life. Your old friends think you've become too spiritual, weird, or different. They miss the old you, the one who participated in drama, complained about life, and reinforced their worldview that nothing can really change. Number two, spiritual communities. You try to participate in spiritual communities, but they feel shallow or performative based. Everyone's trying to be enlightened, using spiritual concepts to promote real growth, or they're competing over who's more evolved. And number three, the authentic space. This is where you can see through the dysfunction in both worlds, but belong fully to neither. You're stuck in this weird middle ground where you're too conscious for unconscious people, but too real for spiritual people. When you become authentic, you become a clean mirror, where your presence becomes a reflection of others. Without saying anything, without trying to teach or preach to others, you reflect back to people their own potential and their own capacity for authenticity in their lives. And for the people who aren't ready for that reflection, your very existence becomes threatening. But everyone has the choice to remain unconscious or not. There's something called authenticity threat. When people encounter someone living authentically, It triggers comparative authenticity anxiety, where they start questioning their own choices and their own level of realness. Most people respond to this anxiety in predictable ways, where they try to pull you back down to their level. They dismiss your growth as a phase. They become hostile or critical, or they distance themselves and find others to be with who also have their same limitations. What you're experiencing is called consciousness isolation. This occurs when someone evolves beyond their social group's dominant consciousness level, causing systemic isolation, where you are excluded from social interactions and support networks, basically causing loneliness. But this isolation is temporary because self-actualization reveals that people at higher levels of development eventually find meta-motivated relationships, which are connections based on mutual growth, authenticity, and shared values rather than mutual dysfunction. The loneliness you're feeling isn't permanent, it's transitional. You're in this space between who you were and who you're becoming, between the relationships that no longer fit and the ones that haven't arrived yet. This period of isolation serves a crucial function in your evolution. It forces you to develop a relationship with yourself, because when external validation becomes unavailable, you're forced to find internal validation. And when no one understands you, you're forced to understand yourself. Being able to be alone with yourself is actually one of the most important signs of emotional maturity that teaches you to be complete within yourself. So when the right relationships do show up, you're relating from a place of wholeness rather than neediness. Here's a big misconception about awakening that's been kept alive for centuries: that spirituality is about transcending your humanity by rising above emotions and becoming some kind of always peaceful being. But the opposite is true. Real awakening is about fully embracing your humanity without being enslaved by it. Emotional mastery isn't about eliminating emotions. It's about experiencing them fully while maintaining the capacity to choose your response. This is called emotional granularity, which is the ability to distinguish between subtle emotional states and respond appropriately rather than reactively. The ruler method, which is an acronym for recognizing, understanding, labeling, expressing, and regulating emotions, shows us what true emotional mastery actually looks like. Recognition is when you feel anger arising and you notice it immediately without judgment. Understanding is when you recognize this anger is information, a boundary being crossed. Labeling is when you can distinguish between anger, frustration, and rage. Expressing is when you communicate your boundary clearly without attacking the other person. And regulating is when you use the energy of anger to take appropriate action without being consumed by it. Let me break down what authentic emotional mastery actually looks like. You can feel anger without being consumed by it. You experience the full sensation of anger in your body, the heat and the energy, but without your identity fusing with that emotional state. You experience sadness, but without drowning. When grief arises, you let it move through you completely. You cry when you need to. You feel the weight of loss without making it mean something's wrong with you. Also, you can be faced with fear without being stuck. Fear becomes information rather than a limitation. And people who can be present with fear without being controlled by it make better decisions and take more appropriate risks. Lastly, you become aware of all emotions that arise and pass through you. So you're not the anger, sadness, or fear. You're the consciousness that experiences them. The highest levels of human development are characterized by integration. This means you can feel anger and maintain compassion. You can experience sadness and still hold joy. You can be present to fear and still take action. And you can acknowledge darkness and still choose the light. It's about fully engaging with the human experience from a place of awareness rather than reacting. Research on neural integration shows that awakened individuals don't have fewer emotions. They have better communication between their emotional centers, or limbic system, and their executive functioning, or the prefrontal cortex. Awakening isn't just a mental shift, it's a full body transformation that requires embodied awareness where you're not rising above your emotions. You're learning to feel them fully without being overwhelmed. This is why awakening can be so disorienting for people around you because you're just being authentic in a world that most people have forgotten what that even looks like. After all the breakthrough moments, the profound realizations, and the spiritual alignment, life becomes ordinary again. And this is where most people get scared. This is where they think that they've fallen off their path or somehow regressed. But they haven't. They've just moved beyond the drama of seeking. First, we need to understand peak experiences, which are those dramatic temporary states of expanded consciousness, the kind that make you feel like you've cracked the code on the universe. But plateau experiences, they provide a more stable, ongoing sense of sacredness in our ordinary lives. Research on spiritual development reveals that continuous mindfulness practice doesn't create peak experiences. It actually elevates your baseline consciousness. So you don't need to be in a special state to access awareness because awareness becomes your default state. The more awakened you become, the more ordinary you feel. The drama of seeking for more is gone. The spiritual highs you used to chase feel pointless, and the need to have profound insights fades. This is called the death of the seeker, when your entire identity as someone on a spiritual journey dissolves. This can be profoundly disorienting because seeking gives your life meaning, purpose, and identity. Without the drama of problems to solve, levels to attain, or states to achieve, who are you? And what's your purpose? But here's what's actually happening. You're discovering what it is to have an ordinary mind, which is the realization that the extraordinary was always hidden in plain sight within our ordinary lives. Your daily walk becomes a moving prayer that you no longer take for granted. A conversation with a friend becomes a gathering of consciousness, and washing the dishes becomes a meditation. Once the seeking stops, your life reorganizes around a completely different operating system. Problems become puzzles instead of evidence of personal failure or proof that life is against you. Obstacles transform into opportunities, and what used to feel like roadblocks now feel like redirections. You become energetically aligned, and you start attracting different people, those that are authentic like yourself, and you gain natural presence, where you become naturally calming to others without any effort on your part. The moment you stop seeking transformation is the moment real transformation becomes possible. When you're not trying to get anywhere, you can finally be where you are in the moment. There's something called arrival anxiety, which is the psychological distress that occurs when people achieve what they thought would make them happy, only to discover it doesn't provide lasting fulfillment. This also happens to spiritual seekers. They spend years working towards awakening. Imagine it will be this permanent state of bliss and clarity, and when they realize awakening is actually the death of the one who wanted to be awakened, it can be very unsettling. But what replaces the seeking is presence. You realize that everything you were looking for, peace, love, fulfillment, connection, and purpose, was never missing. It was just buried under the activity of looking for it. The awakening isn't in the peak experiences. It's in the recognition that every moment is already perfect exactly as it is, including the moments when it doesn't feel perfect at all. Here's something you may not know. Your awakening might make you temporarily less likable. Not because you've become arrogant or superior, but because you've stopped participating in the collective agreements that keep everyone comfortable in their limitations. Your family might prefer the old you, the one who played along with dysfunction, enabled their patterns, and never challenged the family system. Your coworkers might miss the version of you that complained with them, gossiped, and reinforced their victim narratives. But when someone completes their own individuation process, you become whole and authentic, which automatically makes you become a catalyst for others' transformation. Due to mirror neurons that fire both when we perform an action and when we observe someone else doing that same action. And these same neural mechanisms are active when we observe someone living authentically. This is why some people feel uncomfortable around you even when you're not doing anything. Their nervous system is experiencing what authentic living feels like. And if they're not ready for that level of responsibility, it creates cognitive dissonance within them because you are an authenticity threat, which occurs when people encounter someone living genuinely. It triggers an unconscious comparison process where they start questioning, why can't I be that free? And what would I have to give up to be that real? Most people respond to this internal questioning with defensive devaluation. When they try to diminish your authenticity to protect their own comfort zone. But here are 4 things you need to do. Number 1, lead by example, not by explanation, because modeling behavior is 7 times more effective than verbal teaching. Your job isn't to explain consciousness to people. It's to embody it so consistently that others can't help but notice the difference. Number 2, hold space without absorbing drama. This requires differentiation, which is the ability to be emotionally present without becoming emotionally entangled. And it's one of the most sophisticated forms of emotional intelligence. Holding space means being present to someone's pain without trying to fix it, allowing others to have their experience without making it about you, and maintaining your center while witnessing their struggle, which actually regulates other people's nervous system. Number 3, show up authentically even when it's uncomfortable. This requires fierce self-compassion, which is the willingness to be true to yourself even when others prefer your false self. And people who maintain authenticity despite social pressure have significantly higher levels of mental well-being. The more conscious you become, the more you realize that true service isn't about doing more. It's about being more, because the greatest gift we can give to others is our own freedom from suffering. When you're not suffering over your own stuff, you have capacity to hold space for others' growth. The most important thing that you can do isn't refuse to participate in the collective delusion. It's remaining compassionate towards those who aren't ready for that choice. Living authentically requires extraordinary courage because it means standing alone when necessary, being misunderstood, being criticized, and sometimes being rejected by people you love. Enlightenment is not an achievement. There's no finish line where you finally get it, and then you spend the rest of your life in a blissful awareness. That's the biggest lie in spirituality, because the highest levels of human development are characterized not by achievement, but by the recognition that development itself is ongoing and nonlinear. Some days you'll feel incredibly awake. Other days you'll wonder if you've learned anything at all. Both experiences are equally valid parts of the awakening process. Sustainable growth happens not through self improvement efforts, but through self acceptance practices. When you stop trying to become someone different, you naturally evolve into who you really are. And when behavior is internally motivated rather than externally validated, it becomes sustainable and authentic. You've awakened because you stopped trying to wake up. And you found yourself because you stopped looking for a self to find. Now, instead of trying to have experiences, you become present to this experience. Instead of working on yourself, you work with yourself. And instead of becoming someone special, you become especially yourself. Till next time, stay trauma free and take care.